Hello, everyone. This is Tommy Lee Hayes Brown with Rito Recognition Solutions. I'm here with my friend Dr. Charles Scherbaum, who's our Chief Analytics Officer. Charles has agreed to spend some time with us, about 20 minutes, just to go over a great topic, which is the return on investment with your recognition program. Charles is the industry expert in analytics, talent assessment, performance management, and employee research. For over 12 years, Charles has overseen numerous research and analytic initiatives that play significant roles in the success of a number of Fortune 500 companies. A part of the Rito Recognition Solutions team since 2007, Charles consults with Rito and its clients on predictive analytics and workforce metrics. Charles received his PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from Ohio University and is an associate professor of psychology at Baruch College. Among a wide variety of courses he's taught are HR analytics, performance management, personnel psychology, and psychometrics. He's a writer. He's been published in a bunch of a variety of industry periodicals. We're just very, very happy to have him with you today. And again, the return on investment for recognition is really a hot button topic. All of us recognition professionals have to be able to prove the return on our investment spend. And if we don't, we are in jeopardy of losing the rally and the finances to make sure that our employees are engaged and thus our organization's results improve. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Charles. If you do have questions, please tap the tab that says ask a question and enter in there. I'll get it directly and we'll have a short Q&A at the end with Charles and your questions. Thank you. Go ahead, Charles. It's on you.
All right. Thanks so much, Tommy Lee. I really appreciate that warm introduction. As Tommy Lee mentioned, we're really going to talk about the question of how do you demonstrate really the value and the return on your recognition program. Certainly, survey after survey has shown that most organizations have some form of a recognition program, whether that's a years of service program, it might be a behavioral-based or points-based program, and it may even be a non-monetary, social or informal peer-to-peer recognition program, but most companies have some form of this and invest heavily in the technologies, the solutions related to this. Now, the reason we do this is because we believe it creates a better employee experience, helps motivate employees and elevate performance. Now, while these are very common, one of the most discouraging things I think about it is that survey after survey shows that employees do not feel recognized or appreciated at work. And the reason this is discouraging is the most basic thing that a recognition program is supposed to facilitate in an organization is employees feeling recognized. And so we have to start asking the questions of, well, why is it that we have all of these programs and employees are not feeling recognized? And therefore, how do we need to look at this question to really show the ROI? And so there's a real opportunity that I want to talk to you today about how we can better leverage the employee recognition programs we have to truly show the ways in which they are impacting employee experience, customer experience, and organizational success. So I think there's a great opportunity, and I'm going to talk about the ways in which we can do that and share a little bit of how we've done that with some of our clients. Now, everybody in the recognition space in one way or another has probably been asked the ROI question before. It's a difficult one to answer. And I got to say, like when we started out on our journey about 12 years ago, we didn't have the answer either. And some of what you're going to see today really is about a decades-long odyssey that my colleagues at Rito and I have gone on to really understand how do we examine and link recognition programs to organizational success. Now, to date, there's been what I've seen is three primary approaches of how people have tried to answer this question. The first one is that they look at program utilization and participation. Given that most of these programs sit on platforms that are technology enabled, it's fairly easy to see, are people using them? Are they logging in? Have they registered? Are they providing recognition? Clearly, this is very important because obviously a program can't work if the program's not being used. So these really do, this kind of approach to looking at the ROI question does provide some foundational information about the program's use and its participation. Again, if it's not getting traction in the organization, it really never will create any ROI or any value for the organization. Second is surveys that we might do of managers and organizations that have recognition programs, asking them to rate a variety of questions around the perceived value of these programs. Do they think it works? Do they believe it's driving engagement? Do they believe that it's reducing turnover, reducing absenteeism, driving performance, and driving success? And again, managers' opinions are a valuable starting point to ask this question. If managers do not believe these programs are useful, they will not use them. And given that we rely so heavily on managers to really bring recognition to life on a day-to-day basis and essentially on a daily interactions implement these programs, having managers find these programs as valuable and believe in them is really critical to their success. Lastly, we often can look at macro level indicators. So these might be studies where we'll look at the differences between companies with and without recognition programs in terms of their earnings per share, return on assets, return on equity, profitability. There might be some macro level engagement numbers or macro level turnover. And again, this helps in some ways make the case because clearly it shows companies in general that have these types of programs are performing at better levels than those who don't. Each of these is important. And if you're measuring your program and its success using one of these three right now, you really shouldn't stop. But what I want to talk a little bit today about what else we really need to do. And the problem with each of these indicators is they give us a piece of the puzzle, but alone or in combination, they'll never really solve the puzzle for us. And what we need is some different pieces. And I want to back up for us to think a little bit about what does it take? Well, first of all, we know that the act of recognition is not the same as the act of good recognition. And really when we look at program utilization, it's a lot like point of sale transaction data. It tells us something happened. It didn't tell us if that was something good or not. Certainly managers can recognize their employees in ways that they don't feel appreciated by simply just saying, thanks, good job, without being specific, showing some authenticity, meaningful, making sure that the employee truly feels appreciated in the act of recognition. And so, a couple things that we started with is asking the question of, all right, we know that recognition is not the same as effective recognition, and effective recognition really what seems to be important. Therefore, A, how do you measure effective recognition? And when managers are effective, do they perform better than managers who are not effective? Once we've identified who is and who's not effective, can we help them get better at it? And ultimately, does helping managers get better make a real difference? And so we've taken an approach not so much on these macro level indicators or managers' opinions or even utilization on its own, is that we're focused much more on recognition effectiveness. And to measure recognition effectiveness, we'll talk about some of the criteria, but once we link to effectiveness, it's much clearer to see how we would look at employee outcomes, customer outcomes, and business outcomes by showing that managers who are more effective at recognition have more engaged employees. Managers who are more effective at recognition have more satisfied customers. Managers who are effective at recognition produce better business results. Now, to date, most programs do not measure recognition effectiveness. And I need to say, when we started this journey, I can't say that we did either. And really what we discovered through a variety of predictive analytics studies and AI type studies is that once we can get to effectiveness, we can truly and clearly see the ways in which recognition drives business success. Now, to measure recognition effectiveness, there's a couple of things we need to do that are pretty different than what we do today. First of all, we need to look at not just simple utilization, but we need to dig deeper. We need to look at a variety of types of activity. So for example, it's not so much to say that there was recognition activity, but who was recognized? How often were they recognized? What was the rate of recognition? At a number of companies, and we've seen this in the industry, that managers hoard it's a points-based program and that there's some sort of budgetary value attached to it, managers will hold on to that budget all year long and then give all of their recognition in the last week of the budgetary period, which means 95% of the time where that budget was available, employees were not recognized using that mechanism. So if we thought about the recognition velocity that's consistent and steady over time is much better than a velocity that's over a very short period of time and happens very quickly. We certainly know from psychology that recognizing a behavior, a positive behavior in particular, close in time to when it happened is going to lead to the greatest likelihood that it happens again. They call this the law of effect. So if you recognize something is more likely to happen, the closer you recognize it in time to when it happened, the stronger that relationship. So we need to use a broad array of usage and activity metrics, and usually from multiple sources. We want to look at recognition inside the group, outside the group. We want to look at who's getting recognized, what percentage of the group's being recognized, how long has it been since the last recognition. So a lot of different ways of digging deeper and transforming basic usage data into something that provides a little bit more insights. Secondly, and probably the most important part of this, is that recognition effectiveness can only be determined by the recipient. Recognition is effective when the individual feels recognized, they feel motivated, they feel that that interaction with their manager or their peer impacted how hard they want to work for the organization, how long they want to stay, how much they want to commit. So the key here is that we need to look at it from the recipient's perspective. And I would say of all the metrics that I have seen to date, very few of them, if any, actually look at the recipient's perspective. But again, they are the key because they are the only ones that can tell us if recognition was effective. These indicators that we might want to look at, they need to be linked to the individual and behaviors. That way we can link individual outcomes to individual experiences with recognition, and we need to track this over time. It's not so great to be able to say at a point in time, here's what people thought, here was effective, here's not, but we want to trend this over time to see who's getting better, who's declining. Are some people flat in their recognition effectiveness? They're not growing or changing. Where do they stand compared to others in the organization? So there's a number of other criteria that we won't have time to go into today, but really the key is that we need to look at data a little bit differently, particularly the data we already have. And we're going to need to generate some new data in looking at the employee's perspective on the recognition that they're receiving to identify who's doing it right and who needs to improve. Now, although there's a lot of ways of doing this, I'm going to share a little bit of a case study of where we've developed this with one of our clients. And again, as I mentioned, this was a 10-year odyssey and there was a lot of lessons learned along the way. And there's probably a million ways of doing this. And this just shares the way that we came up with and found worked for us and this client. And I think it possesses all the key elements that we've talked about. And what we call this system is the RQ, or Distance Analytics and the RQ score. And really the RQ score is a metric that indicates the effectiveness of the manager at providing recognition to her or his employees. Managers can be very high at this or they can be very low. It's much like what you would think of as a predictive analytics algorithm or machine learning algorithm. It has a variety of different components that are combined. But if I were to think about the types of information that goes into the score, it's really the recognition activity, what we call recognition outputs, and ongoing recognition perception. So this is the employee's experience with the recognition that they have received from their manager. And again, this is the key to this formula, is it tells us not only what's happening, but were those activities effective for the employee. And the great thing about the RQ score is that we can then link it to all forms of business metrics. So we can look at how does recognition effectiveness relate to employee engagement, employee commitment, intent to leave, turnover, sales, customer loyalty. And I want to share a few results with you today that just shows you the power of taking this different approach to looking at this ROI question, because it can so directly answer it. So first of all, we did something that's very classic of, we looked at those who were the most effective at recognition using our RQ score and those who were the least effective. And we started by looking at the employee experience. Certainly if we think about service profit chains, employee experience and employee engagement is pretty early in that profit chain and something we need to ensure. So one of the things we can clearly see here is that when managers are effective at recognition, there's a better experience. The employees are more engaged, the employees are more focused on the client, and the employees have a greater sense that the organization is competitive in its marketplace. Now, one thing I want to point out for those of you that have done employee opinion surveys before is notice the starting point here. For all of these graphs, we're in the 80s for 2 of the 3, but certainly in the mid 70s in terms of percent favorable on competitiveness. And as anybody know who's done these types of surveys and done action planning and organizational development around them, that really once you start getting into the 70s and 80s, we essentially hit the bend in the curve, the point where all the easy stuff is already done. Now we have the really hard work of changing the organization, improving the relationship between managers and employees over time in a sustained way. So the fact that we can get any difference at these points in the kind of engagement continuum is really quite striking. We can also look at employee experience in more focused ways. For example, recognition. Managers who are more effective at recognition on the RQ score have employees who report they're getting more recognition for a job well done. The organization is making better use of recognition to encourage performance. And also we're seeing that inclusivity is a little bit higher in these particular groups. That managers, when they're more effective at recognition, they're able to create work groups where opinions, particularly differing opinions, can be discussed and debated in constructive ways. Certainly that every organization right now is thinking about how to broadly be inclusive of all employees, and certainly recognition appears to be a very useful tool in helping that happen. We see that also when we think about resiliency and general senses of well-being, that when managers are effective at recognition, employees are feeling more accomplished and getting greater satisfaction from their work. They're feeling less pressured by their job. Again, they're more resilient. And certainly when we think about well-being and we're asking employees to do more with less, resiliency is critical. And that they believe management is interested in their well-being. So again, those more positive interactions between the manager and the employee are leading to much more positive perspectives on the organization, its intentions, and the work itself. Now, while looking at engagement is really important, we think about a service profit chain. It's something very early on in that chain. Let's for a moment jump to the other end of that cycle and think about the actual end in terms of sales. And what we were able to do again is we looked at the managers who really are among the best at recognition, the most effective, and those who are among the least. And we looked at subsequent sales performance. So for example, we looked at the RQ scores at the end of March, and then we looked at what happened in the following 8 months after that. And what we can see is a very clear pattern. Month after month, managers who are more effective at recognition produce better sales results in the future. And if we think about this over the 8-month period, it averaged about almost 8.4 additional transactions per employee per month. Imagine if we were selling BMWs or Mercedes or any other high value product, moving 8 more units per employee per month is a substantial financial gain for being effective at recognition. So we see that managers produce teams and work groups that have a much more positive climate. Employees are more engaged. They feel that they're being supported to a much greater degree, but also they deliver better sales results. In addition to kind of looking at this over time, one of the things that we know from the learning sciences and from other places is we want to look at what happens pretty quickly after this. So one of the things we did is we looked at managers' RQ scores, and then we wanted to look at year-over-year change. Now, in the previous example, we showed that every single the effective managers were producing better results. And that was in a roughly positive economic time. And those are the times where it's easy for everybody to succeed. We wanted to stack the deck against this comparison and look at what happens when the chips are down and we're in a negative economic environment. And so what we did is we selected 3 different months in which there was a decline in the sales from one year to the next. So when we look at the year-over-year sales changes, we can see the subsequent year is a negative economic environment and everybody's doing worse. And this is the case where we really expect to see recognition having a benefit. If recognition is truly valuable, can we help stem the losses when everything is bad? And what we see from these 3 months that we used here is that in each one of them, managers who were the most effective at recognition stemmed the losses and produced better results than managers who were not effective. So even in the worst of times, managers who are good at recognition can help stem the losses. That we can't control the negative economic environment, but certainly we can control our reactions to that environment and how we manage our people. Clearly, managers who are effective at recognition are doing a better job. And so kind of in closing, and before we open it up for questions, is today what we've really talked about is the idea of how can we show ROI? And there's 3 primary ways that people have traditionally done this. And we're really proposing a 4th that's focused not on managers' opinions or on simple usage activity, but really around recognition effectiveness and measuring the effectiveness of your managers at how well they interact and provide recognition to their employees, and then linking indicators of effectiveness to organizational outcomes. And what we have found in our work with our clients, as we've shown today, is that when managers are effective at recognition, they just produce a better employee experience and better financial results. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tommy Lee, to see if we have any questions.
We do. We have a couple. Well, 1, 2, we have 4.
All right.
Let's see how much time we should be able to get through them.
Yes.
So Tamika says, does the RQ score work just as well for new managers as seasoned managers? Is it just as valuable no matter your skill set or your tenure?
Yes, this is a great question. Recognition is a skill. It's not something that we're born with and that we develop over time. So even someone who's a new manager might be particularly effective at recognition. People who are very seasoned managers could be effective, or they could be very ineffective at it. So the nice thing about the RQ score is the way it works is it benchmarks you against yourself over time. So regardless of where you start, the key is really, are you making progress and improving the way you interact with your employees? So we haven't found that it's necessarily related to experience or time on the job, that there just are some people with a greater degree of skill at this. Those that probably have worked for companies that have greater investment in their managerial talent, might be a little better at it than, let's say, companies where we don't really invest in our managerial talent.
Right. Great question. Great response. Dan says, who should RQ scores be shared with? Can it be used for competition between managers or work groups?
It's a great question. Anytime we have a metric, we always want to manage it. Now, certainly that could be done with the RQ score. We see its real value in looking at it over time and how are you progressing and improving the quality of experience for your employees? So certainly we can rank employees on their managers on their RQ score, and we could tie that to all sorts of things.
Do you advise that? Is that something you advise? Or is it more, I don't know, if I was a manager with the RQ score, I don't know if I want my other manager to know my RQ score, but I guess you don't have to put the actual score.
Yeah. And certainly, one thing is that, my direct manager should be able to see my score to help me improve as a manager and ensure that I'm not creating a human capital risk by just being ineffective at my job. The degree to which it's shown beyond that would certainly be a choice. I mean, generally, we don't share performance management data particularly widely in an organization. If we thought about this as part of performance management, maybe you don't want to share it with everyone, but certainly those who are higher in the organizational hierarchy should be able to see how their subordinate managers are performing.
Great. Tara says, how long was the study of the results you shared?
Okay, we've picked the highlights. We've been doing research on this for really over 10 years, and we started with the basic kind of predictive analytics, machine learning type study where we were correlating over time recognition activity with sales results and employee experience. And that evolved into more experimental studies where we started looking at recognition effectiveness and could we develop it? And we would have kind of randomized trials, much like you'd have in medical studies where we would assign managers to do different things. At this point, we've done probably 20 different studies. And so I'm picking little pieces from each of them. And even at our clients where we've implemented this, we're constantly evaluating it to ensure that recognition is moving the dial and we're understanding it. What we might find is that early on, it might impact one metric because there's a lot of differences between managers and how effective they are. When we start closing that gap, it might relate to other things because we've solved some problems and now moved on to the next.
Nice. And then one last one. Jeff says, it makes sense, more of a comment. It made sense that recognition helps mitigate results during hard times. If you treat me right, I'll be there when my company needs you. So it's just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true. I mean, we're talking about, the good thing about the RQ is, we're thinking about it as differences between managers and how good they are at providing recognition to their employees. But the other way to think about this is who's doing a better job creating positive and sustainable relationships with their employees. And those pay dividends in the good times and in the bad. And we think about, we're asking people really to bring their whole selves to work and to give it their all. Certainly that's going to be a more sustainable and easier thing when we have these more positive relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, it just makes sense. Treat me like you want to, like, treat me, what's the golden rule? Treat us.
The golden rule.
Yeah, the golden rule. Let's just say that. Well, thank you very much. That's the end of our questions. How do we reach you, Charles, if we want to contact you after this?
All right, I'm going to put my contact information here up on the screen. And so if you have any questions or questions you want to ask and you weren't able to do them today, or would like to hear more about our RQ score and the way we've approached recognition effectiveness, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
That's awesome. And take him up on it. He means it. Thank you, Charles.
All right, thank you.
I'll see you again. Take care.